two speakers this morning. We have John Mancini with us and also Lisa Murphy-Cipolla, who will both be talking about sex abuse and the forensic process and the risk of reoffending. So our first speaker today is John Mancini. John is a licensed professional counselor and he's a certified sex addiction therapist. John has specialty training and has valuable psychological insight he gained from the University of St. Joseph. He is the clinical director of the Essential Path Family Institute, which is a leading sexual addiction and relationship recovery program in Hartford County. The program services and provides treatment for addicts, partners, and spouses of addicts, couples, adolescents, children, and the loved ones who are struggling with the effects of an addiction and codependency lifestyle. John also runs a sex addiction men's therapy group, which helps support men that are struggling with sex addiction type behavior that includes but is not limited to fantasy, anonymous pornography, cybersex, paying for, intrusive, exploitive, voyeurism, exhibitionism, seductive role, trading, and pain exchange. So the man covers a lot of different areas, to say the least. So I'd like to warmly welcome and thank again for coming, John Mancini.
So just a little background. I started studying sex addiction with the International Institute for Trauma and Addiction out of Arizona under Dr. Patrick Carnes, who really is an international figure when it comes to sex addiction. He's an authority on it. And I found that it's really an epidemic in our society. And especially with the online activity that's going on right now, and it's really exploiting our youth in a big way. The pornography industry is really exploiting anyone born after 1995 has it really stacked against them as far as being able to have healthy bonding and attachment when it comes to their sexuality. So through being a certified sex addiction therapist, I was found by the courts to do a sex offending risk assessment by chance, and then I ended up doing one of those. I went down to the community court down the road here on Washington Street, and then I learned about the Connecticut Association for Treating the Sex Offenders, and then all of last year I was being supervised by Dr. Suzanne Segroy, who wrote a couple books on sexual abuse and particularly women, and I sat with her, and she supervised me doing some cases, and also I sat with her and co-led her men's sex offending group. So I'm going to talk about child abuse, sex abuse, kind of what the signs and symptoms of it. But typically, I do more psychotherapy than I do interviewing and evals right now. I think I'm leaning towards doing more interviewing and evals because I work with a lot more adults than children right now, but more and more children are coming into my practice. And what I realized was there's a wounded child in all of us. And so when offenders come in, or an addict comes in, or someone who has been a victim of addiction or offending, I noticed that it all roots back to their childhood. And so I really just end up creating a safe environment for them to reparent their little child, themselves, their little boy or little girl inside them. So it's very important that they reconnect. And what I found is through consciousness and awareness, you really can transform your past and really step into a very empowering, present and future when you take responsibility for giving yourself what you should have been given in the first place, which was legitimate safety, emotional safety, and boundaries. So we'll just hand these out. So I guess it's important to start, is what is considered child sex abuse. I'll just read it. If you're not exactly sure what sexual abuse is, you're not alone, because a lot of people think it has to be penetration or some sort of, physical crossing, but it goes a lot, beyond that. So, all sexual touching between an adult and a child is sexual abuse. Sexual touching between children can also be sexual abuse. But sexual abuse between children is often defined when there's a significant age difference between the children, or as their children are very different developmentally or size-wise. So what I have found is children are naturally curious about their sexuality and very sensitive to exploring that area. And when boundaries are not in place or supervision is lacking, they can come by being abused or being a victimizer and be abusing someone else naturally. It's not something that they're trying to harm, it's something they're just trying to explore, but it has a great impact on children's development. So, the sex abuse does not have to involve penetration, like I said, or force, pain, or even touching. If an adult engages in a sexual behavior, looking, showing, or touching with a child to meet the adult's interests or sexual needs is sexual abuse. So it can be in very subtle ways. A child can be constantly being abused sexually, and it just doesn't have to be as obvious as a rape or a forceful interaction. So it's important. What I learned is when I do my intakes and assessments that it's really important to do a thorough job in finding the family dynamics that clients and patients grew up around, because if they had a lot of siblings, where it was their addiction in the family, where parents might be absent-minded or not available emotionally, and that there wasn't a lot of supervision for them. These are all very important things to understand. So child sex abuse includes harmful contact and non-contact behavior. So the obvious is the abuse of physical contact. Of course, touching the genitals or private parts, making a child touch someone else's genitals or play sexual games, putting objects or body parts inside the genitals. Then the non-contact sexual abuse, right? Showing pornography to a child, which is becoming more and more, 8 out of 10 sex addicts are men, and pornography has become a real epidemic in society. It's become a norm. It's at the fingertips of almost every electronic device we have, and children are coming by it a lot. They're coming into it. They're seeing it more frequently without filters on computers, and so this is impacting right away what they think about sexuality and how they're supposed to react to when someone addresses them around sexuality. So it's a big deal. Photographing a child in sexual poses, encouraging a child to watch or hear sexual acts, inappropriately watching a child undress or use the bathroom. Sexually abusive images of children in the internet, as well as the activities described above. There's also the serious and growing problem of people making and downloading sexual images of children on the internet. To view sexual abusive images of children is to participate in the abuse of a child. It may cause someone to consider sexual interactions with a child as acceptable. People who look at this material need to help to prevent their behavior from becoming even more serious. See, what's happening is the more we look at images in fantasy type videos on the internet, the more we start to think that it's normal. And here's an example. There was a man who was a construction worker, and he was having trouble in his marriage, and he ended up looking at pornography at night when his spouse would go to bed, and it became a habit and an addiction. And he started to look at other married couples, swapping and having sex, and then he started looking at child porn after that, and he got in trouble with the law. But before he got in trouble with the law, he was looking at so much porn around, pornography around marriage swapping that he solicited his neighbor. Like it was like just, she was taking out the garbage can and he solicited her and she was appalled and, you know, was completely offended and he didn't know why. And this just goes to show you that the impact of, you know, constant pornography and constant, you know, looking, you know, online is how it can affect your perception of reality and what's appropriate and what's not. So it's even more of a threat for children now. With adults, we're thinking, you know, soliciting a child or, you know, having pornography out in the wide open is a norm, and it's not. And not to say that pornography is wrong or bad, and it can enhance sexual activity for well-adjusted adults, but when it becomes habitual or, you know, compulsive, it really becomes problematic, and it impacts not just the person's life, but all their loved ones as well. So it's really important to look at that. So we can go to warning signs in children and adolescents of possible child sex abuse. Any one sign doesn't mean that a child was sexually abused, but the presence of several suggests that you begin asking questions and consider seeking help. Keep in mind that some of these signs can emerge at other times of stress, such as during a divorce, death of a family member or pet, problems at school with friends, or other anxiety-inducing or traumatic events. Behavior you may see in a child or an adolescent. They have nightmares or other sleep problems. Seem distracted or distant at odd times. Has a sudden change in eating habits. Refuses to eat, loses or drastically increases appetite. Has trouble swallowing. Sudden mood swings, rage, fear. So all, you know, a lot of kids are diagnosed with ADHD, and I think a lot has to do with the stimulation and electronics that are coming at them, and the absence of, you know, a present caregiver because they're always online or on their computer distracted. This can really impact how a child sees themselves and affects their self-esteem. They can develop new or unusual fears of certain people or places. Refuse to talk about a secret shared with an adult or older child. Talk about a new older friend. Suddenly has money, toys, or other gifts without reason. Thinks of self or body as repulsive, dirty, or bad. Exhibits adult-like sexual behaviors, language, and knowledge. So when someone comes into my office as a sex addict or a victim of sex addiction or sex offending, they typically they went through these and they went through these symptoms and they never were addressed. They were never treated. So now it's very difficult to be a victim of what was done so long ago. So it's very important to help them establish a treatment plan and a process for them to take responsibility for, you know, healing that part of themselves. And it takes a long time, up to 3 to 5 years actually, of rigorous individual group therapy if they can, and for some 12-step type programs like SA or SLA to help. In the studies show, the research shows that all 3 of those are really paramount in a successful recovery plan. And the reason why it's so long, 3 to 5 years, is because it really affects how your brain is developed and wired, and how you're organized to feel, and how your defense mechanisms are formed, because you've been violated and you didn't know it, and if you did know it, you blamed yourself, because children tend to blame themselves for how they're treated. So it's a pretty big burden to carry through life as a secret. It really can impact you tremendously. And another thing too is a child up till the age of 7 or 8, however they're treated, they're going to call it love. So if they're abused, if they're sexually abused or emotionally or physically, verbally abused, they're going to associate that their existence called for that. Like, this is what love looks like. This is, I'm not enough, or I'm bad, I'm wrong, I did something. And therefore I deserve to be treated this way, and this way I'm being treated is they're loving me. And that's not true. And you get adults, because what I found is children's aliveness touches adults' unfinished places. So if you're an adult, if you're a parent or a caregiver, and a 5-year-old is expressing their anger or their rage or their hate, something, a shadow type behavior or a less than attractive attribute, the child is not doing anything wrong. They're just simply expressing their humanness, their aliveness, okay? And you want to, and they need to be, that part of them needs to be validated. But what happens is, if the adult was met with violence around that behavior when they were that child's age, they're going to touch that violence when that child's aliveness is going to trigger what came at them when they were young. So unless they're conscious of that, what they're going to do is they're just going to repeat the cycle. They're going to treat the child the way they were treated. And so what happens there is the adult will label the child's behavior as wrong, bad, disrespectful, defiant, and being where the child is developmentally, they can't distinguish between the behavior, which was labeled wrong, which isn't, it's not wrong, but it's labeled wrong or bad, as their existence, that I'm bad, I'm wrong. Okay? So this small core belief at a very young age, very subtle and core, at the core of their belief system, snowballs as they grow. And then as they become an adult, basically their whole personality is organized around this core belief that I'm not enough, I'm wrong, I'm bad. And that's where, personas and personality and defense mechanisms come in. And what we do is we present ourselves to the world in a way that we feel that I'm not going to show you any part of me that I'm not going to allow you not to accept me, because I'm going to present myself in such a way that you're going to have to take me at face value. So, but there's a real disservice to self doing that, because it's a betrayal of self. Because what happens is children dissociate. You dissociate from a lot of who you are, your shadow parts that you should be able to have a healthy relationship with, because we're human and so we're made of light and dark. And if you dissociate from your darkness and your shadow parts because you were taught that it's not okay to have those places, then you can't eliminate them because they're part of who we are, but you can, so what I mean is they have to act out some way. They're going to act out in some maladaptive way because their energy, it has to go somewhere. So if you dissociate it for a very long time, it's going to come out in some sort of, not necessarily a deviant way, but in a maladaptive way. An addiction, depression, anxiety, manipulation, seduction, exploitation. And it's almost this part where I can't love myself, therefore my revenge is I'm entitled to abuse and exploit you, is sort of the mindset. And until that is found out through therapy or through an offense, and then they come to the courts or they come to, either through the legal system or through the therapeutic system, they're not aware that that's what they're doing. So that's how offenders are sort of, I think there's a lot of how an offender is born that way, into that way, because there's a part of them that they're dissociated from. And now that's just one theory, and there's many other theories and understandings around it, but it's what I work with. And I found it, once you bring conscious and awareness to what I just shared with you, it really opens up an opportunity for the client to take responsibility for their their wounds and their issues, so they can have more of an empowered and help their self-esteem get stronger. Any questions about that by chance? Was that a little confusing for anyone? Okay. So that's really important with adults. So I do a lot of that with adults. So if I sit with children And I really try to validate, because when a child is sexually abused, it's very difficult to know what's real. What's real. And so helping a child understand that they have a right to feel the way they feel, and to have a protest is very important. You know, that if you're having a protest is not an act of defiance. It's your human right, and you want to be able to be validated in your protest. So that there was this line that I learned in my training: you can't have an authentic yes until you have an authentic no. So you got to be able to say no and feel like safe and loved and accepted before you can honestly have a yes to somebody. It's almost like, I'm going to test you to see how, you know, if I don't give you what you want, will you still love me, kind of thing. So it's real important for child development that the protests are respected and actually encouraged. So where am I here? Okay. So signs are more typical of younger children, an older child behaving like a younger child. All right. Bedwetting, thumb sucking, has new words for private body parts, resist moving clothes when appropriate times, ask other children to behave sexually or play sexual games. So these are things that you're looking for in children and asking them, are these things that they were either asked to do or things that they're interested in asking other children to do. And you want to see, what's real important is all of this is really based around toxic shame. The offenders have a tremendous amount of toxic shame. The offendee have a tremendous amount of toxic shame. And shame is a natural human emotion that needs to be developed. And it's about changing your relationship, changing it from toxic to healthy. And so you need to transfer, you need to be able to do the work, which is, you know, in the 3 to 5 years that I was talking about, to really embody the theories and the teachings and the understandings, to be able to really have a high, you know, strong esteem around feeling shame is not a problem. Feeling shame isn't wrong. Feeling shame is good. It's good information. It helps you to stay connected to your moral compass and to what you believe in value, what you believe in, and what you value. And but what happens is when children are, you know, sexually abused or abused in any way, they move away from their shame. They move away from it. So, you know, it's very important to bring, you know, that awareness around the shame and each person's relationship to it. So behaviors to watch on the next page, behaviors to watch for when adults are with children. We all have personal likes and things that make us uncomfortable. Personal space is the private area of control inside an imaginary line or boundary that defines each person as separate.